Some of you know, and some don't, because a lot of people don't pay attention, that the Great White Hope was accused of Russia collusion from day one, and the Democrats, the Rhino Republicans, and others have gone out of their way trying to prove that the president colluded with Russia. And now that the Mueller report is done and given over to the AG, Attorney General, there's no proof of Russian collusion between the president and the Democrats are still having a hissy fit. They're trying to find something. Oh, we want to see his income tax and all that kind of madness. There was one guy by the name of Michael Tracey who said from day one, no Russian collusion. And he said it. And they hated him for that. And now that it has been proven that there is no Russian collusion, they hate Michael even more so. The theme is to hate Michael because Michael tells the truth. And they don't like it when you tell the truth. I have a lot of respect for Michael. We may not agree on all issues, but I love the fact that he stands on what he believes. Michael Tracey is back. He's been with me before. He's here today. He's an independent journalist, formerly with the Young Turks, and who constantly debunked the liberal media on Trump's Russia collusion narrative. And I wanted to talk to Michael in a few minutes about what he's dealing with now and what it feels like to be right. Michael, welcome back.
Great to be with you again, Jesse.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, man. I know you're a busy man. So what are you feeling or thinking now that they can see that you were right about no Trump-Russia collusion?
Well, first I should clarify that my position from the very beginning on this was never to affirmatively posit no collusion, right? It was to say that there's no evidence available to us that would make likely the inference that collusion took place. And that's an important epistemological distinction, because one of the great flaws of this story from the outset was that it was always more emotion-based on the part of the people who were propagating it rather than fact-based. They always thought that they were perceiving these suspicious ties between Trump campaign associates and Russians, or they looked at Trump's personal interactions with Putin and read his facial expressions and body movements and said, oh, this must mean that he's compromised by the Kremlin, stuff like that, right? So in order to maintain a fidelity to empiricism, I never said that I have the ability to affirmatively state that there was no collusion. It's just that I haven't seen any evidence which would make that possibility in any way viable. And that was kind of my approach from the beginning. In terms of how things are going now, well, I mean, people have accused me of gloating or running around claiming vindication or whatnot. And I guess, given that I have an abrasive style at times, I'm not going to argue with that so much. But I was always very much saddened by this story. I mean, I felt when I read the Barr letter on March 24th, which exonerated Trump of the core collusion charge, it wasn't as if I felt this swell of joy or pleasure. It was almost despair at how just consumed so many people were by this story, and how they jettisoned their critical faculties, how everybody from progressives to libertarians to even some conservatives decided not to reckon in any serious way with the manifold abuses that were on display throughout the story, whether it be surveillance abuses. And we now know that Carter Page, the Trump campaign advisor, was surveilled as a U.S. citizen in part by reference to the FBI citing the Steele dossier, which has now been authoritatively and thoroughly debunked. So that's a huge civil liberties concern. We have members of the federal law enforcement apparatus like Andrew McCabe and Rod Rosenstein plotting amongst one another to potentially, quote, wear a wire on Donald Trump, the duly elected president, in the Oval Office.
Amazing.
Which is amazing, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
amazing.
something that's totally without precedent in all of U.S. history, and again, has grave civil liberties concerns and prefer, libertarians and progressives who in another era would have been very much wary of the abuses of the security state. So the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, they all kind of totally ignored that because they were just so motivated by their blinding hatred of Trump. And that's a really damaging and distorting dynamic. It's going to have long-lasting implications for the polity.
Do you trust them now?
Absolutely not. My trust in them is just cratered to the point where it's not only in the gutter has like been set on fire and demolished. I mean, I can't even put into words how low my trust is at this point. And it's not just people like Rachel Maddow, right? I mean, so she's arguably the most egregious manifestation of all the journalistic wrongdoing and media punditry, deceit that has been such a feature of this story. But she's really just the tip of the rotten iceberg. And I wrote a piece on this last week for The Spectator that people can go read if they want. I think there's sort of a move now to scapegoat people like Rachel and say, oh, yeah, maybe some pundits and some commentators got ahead of themselves. But the journalists were doing a very, careful and serious job.
Yeah, right.
And it's just like, where have you been for the past 3 years? Every week or so, sometimes every day, there are these sort of bombshell stories that were touted as the smoking gun that would take down Trump, and that got frenetic coverage everywhere, whether it be on social media, so Twitter and Facebook, and then onto the cable news chatterers and talk radio and everywhere else. I mean, it dominated the entire media ecosystem, and most of the time this originated from the New York Times and Washington Post and CNN.
Yeah,
and those are the kind of the core. Those organizations constitute the core inner sanctum of American elite journalism, and they were just as culpable as anyone, if not more so, because they got so much wrong. They were forced to do so many humiliating corrections and retractions. They engaged in conduct that, again, in any other era would have drawn huge scrutiny in terms of the ethical dimensions, and we're only just beginning to get to the bottom of it and conduct an audit of how they comport themselves. And I have to say, conservative media, although a lot of them, were on board with Trump from a partisan standpoint, although some of them did a good job, others really faltered as well. So
they're weak. Michael, I wanted to ask, I noticed that they make up these things on the Great White Hope about him, and they all say the same thing. The Great White Hope have to show his 6 years of taxes, something like crazy, right? And everybody starts saying it, and they all just saying it. They're so happy. They're so repeating themselves. And then when they find out that they're wrong, I don't ever hear them come back and say, you know what? We were wrong. We had no proof. Like the Trump-Russian collusion. Why don't they ever come back and apologize? Rather than apologizing for being wrong, they just create something else, and they start singing and dancing about that.
They're just too professionally and emotionally invested in this story, which has dominated American political consciousness for 3 years, to ever admit wrongdoing, no matter what countervailing evidence just is in their face. And that's the hallmark of a religious dogma or a conspiracy theory, where it's never falsifiable. You take on faith the core claims which inform the construction of your worldview, and that's it's become a secular religion for some of these people.
Yeah.
And even now, after the Barr letter, I mean, they said that, it's a cover-up. Barr is somehow distorting Mueller's findings, or he's not accurately portraying what Mueller actually concluded. And again, there was just another death knell for that theory just this morning. Bill Barr was testifying before a congressional committee in the House and reiterated that Robert Mueller himself is participating in the redaction process for the release of the full report, which should come out. And by all indications will. Barr reiterated again that the report will be released, he said, within a week. Right. So this idea that it's another grand conspiracy, that we didn't get it right away, but rather are getting it in mid-April, also makes no sense. It's just because these people, again, have no capacity to self-reflect. They have no ability to critically analyze their own complicity in perpetuating this gigantic 3-year fraud. So they're just going to layer all kinds of rationalizations on top of rationalizations to justify their enormously unethical behavior throughout all this, and they're just going to look progressively foolish.
Is it Trump derangement syndrome?
Well, I mean, I think that's an element here. I think people were utterly convinced throughout 2016 that Trump posed an existential threat to the American Republic. So not just journalists who would believe that, also members of the security state apparatus. So I think it's pretty clear that people like John Brennan believed that. Andrew McCabe believed it. Other members of the FBI and CIA kind of nexus affirmed views that are in line with that theory. And so they thought that all kinds of extraordinary tactics were justified to prevent Trump from taking office. And then once he won, their minds were boggled. They had no idea how to react. So what did they do? They launched this offensive against Trump while he was in the transition phase before he assumed office. You had people like Chuck Schumer going on Rachel Maddow and saying, wow, the Trump better not cross the CIA. They have every which way to Sunday to get back at him should he do that. Basically saying that the, quote, deep state was going to retaliate against Trump, which they most certainly did by doing everything from leaking intercepted communications from Mike Flynn and then giving that to the Washington Post. That would be probably one of the most egregious examples, to, again, invoking this plot to potentially even use the 25th Amendment to extralegally remove Trump from office. I mean, all this is astonishing.
Yeah, it is.
So Trump derangement syndrome, I think, plays into it. I maybe wouldn't use that that phrase exactly, because I think there are legitimate reasons to be concerned about Trump. They just don't have to do with an elaborate international espionage conspiracy theory.
So has your life been under threats now that it's been proved that the president did not collude? Because a lot of them think that they don't realize you're taking the right side, doing what's right. They think you're taking Trump's side. Have your life been under threats since then?
Well, I couldn't have been more clear about this since 2016 that I perceived Trump to pose some legitimate dangers and threats. And, I think he's now subservient to the GOP donor class, which is what he ran against in 2016. I think.
How about for you? Are they threatening you now?
Well, I mean, they're threatening. No, I mean, I don't feel that I'm personally threatened. I mean, I can take criticism, and they've been vociferously criticizing me every which way from Sunday, to use the Chuck Schumer phrase, since this came out, even though, my instincts have been, I think, borne out. And I'm not trying to brag or be, haughty about it, but I think most of what I had said and reported on since 2016 has come to fruition. But it's just made their anger even more intensified. And it's not just me. It's people like Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, Aaron Mate, the small group of us who have been, on a similar path on this story for a long time. We've all been incurring even greater vitriol than ever before, which is kind of ironic, because you think that they would, start to pivot and recognize that maybe part of what we're saying was valid. But no, they've just gotten even more intense in their hatred. But that's okay. I can take it.
I remember, I don't know if you remember, when Bernie Sanders was running against Hillary Clinton, the Democrats took that opportunity away from him, and they never did apologize for that. They just went on to the next subject. Why don't these people apologize for being wrong?
Well, some Democrats did actually acknowledge that Bernie was essentially screwed over. Donna Brazile, who was the interim head of the DNC, eventually did acknowledge that the primaries were rigged. Elizabeth Warren said the same thing. And the DNC actually did undertake some efforts to, for example, reduce the significance of superdelegates, and they just made some changes to the process.
But didn't she admit it that Donna Brazile admit that she gave Hillary Clinton the answer to the debate before it happened?
Well, that came out as incontrovertibly true, because WikiLeaks published the email where she did that unethical behavior, and she was fired from CNN, denounced by her colleagues like Jake Tapper for that. And this is part of why they've been so enraged about, quote, Russian interference. It's because the fruits of that interference, meaning the emails that were published via John Podesta's Spearfish Gmail account and the DNC servers, all those emails reflected extraordinarily poorly on them. So they were embarrassed by it, rightly, because their conduct had a light shown on it, and their bad deeds would have otherwise been concealed from the public had that, quote, Russian interference not taken place. So that's why they've been on this years-long crusade to say that, this was an attack on America. It's tantamount to 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. I'm not joking when I say that Gerald Nadler, the congressman from New York who would have presided over the impeachment hearings, and I'm sure he's very disappointed that he probably won't get an opportunity to do that. Yeah. he went on Chris Hayes' show in early 2018 and actually on MSNBC and actually said that the Russian Twitter trolls and Facebook memes were tantamount to Pearl Harbor. So he was saying that he was likening this to the event which got the United States involved in the most catastrophic global conflict that has ever taken place in human history.
Yeah,
that's where his mind was at. So that's the level of hysteria we've dealt with, and it's insane. And that's why people are so dug into this and can't admit that they were wrong, because it would just shatter their worldview and their entire conceptions of politics for the past 3 years.
I got to ask you this. We're running out of time, so I got a few more questions to ask. Number one is, if it's true that Donna Brazile did that, why would Fox News hire her as a contributor? She can't be trusted.
That's a great question. I don't know. I think Fox News wants to at least superficially create the appearance of having some kind of ideological balance. But Donna Brazile is just a operative. I mean, she's just a political operator. I'm all for balance, but you should have people who are actually truthful and acting from principle, not from partisan incentive, right? And that's who Donna Brazile has always been. She's just a Democratic activist. So I don't know. I can't speak for Fox, but I think she's a convenient foil for them in certain ways, even though she has a documented history of unethical conduct.
So is it because she's black and a Democrat, they want to seem fair?
I don't know. I mean,
and a woman.
I wouldn't want to impute that motivation. I mean, I'll leave that to you to speculate on.
Let me ask, I've noticed that white men, especially white, straight, conservative men of power, Christian men of power, under attack. But in all honesty, all white men and white people are under attack in this country, and no one seemed to care. No one seemed to be trying to stop it. They're going after Joe Biden. They're going to go after Beta O'Rourke if he looked like he's going to win. They're going to stop him. Do you see that white people are under attack by people of color right now?
Well, I mean, I think the Joe Biden allegations are interesting. I think a lot of people in media and politics are pretending to take that supposed scandal extraordinarily seriously, even though everybody admits that there was nothing sexual about his hugs or his, interactions with women that are so supposedly now so damning. So I think people feel social and political and professional pressures to posture as if they feel that's a serious issue when it's really not. And I don't think it'll ultimately harm Joe Biden all that much, although I don't know whether he's actually going to succeed. I think it's interesting to note that the two leading candidates in the Democratic primaries are both, quote, old white men.
Yeah.
And there's this prevailing view that the Democrats are obsessed with identity and are not going to vote for a white male. Well, that's not actually reflected in the data. So I think all of that stems from an ideological position within the elite classes of the Democratic Party, where they put more of an emphasis on identity than is actually accepted amongst the actual rank and file.
But do you see that white people are under attack, though? If white people are the most hated species on this side of heaven, and they shouldn't be treated that way, but they're allowing themselves to be treated that way, and they are being treated that way. Even Andrew Yang, I think his last name is, admitted that, is it Yang, James? Yang.
Yeah, Andrew Yang.
Yeah, he admitted that white people are dying early, and he was attacked for even saying that. So you can't even help white people.
Well, I mean, I think the life expectancy of whites is declining, and that's a serious issue. And I think it ought to be addressed. And Andrew Yang has done that, and others have commented on it, in maybe even maybe a little more circular ways. But I'm a white male. I don't feel like I've been suppressed. I feel like I have a lot of opportunity, and I do get a lot of definitely intense criticism. But it's because I make sometimes provocative statements on politics and culture in public venues. So I'm not going to – I don't want to claim a victimhood narrative.
Well, you don't have to be a victim to it, but you need to speak up and deal with it, of course. Never should lay down and just take it. So are you saying you do not see that white people are under attack?
Well, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience as a white male, and I don't feel as though I'm under attack. I mean, I think there are other serious issues that stifle American political discourse, and one of them, at least in my judgment, isn't that white males are inordinately being suppressed. Although, I mean, I think there are, as I mentioned, there are some issues in terms of how identity gets weaponized that are worth dealing with. And I think a lot of times they're cynical and use this as the pretext to impose a certain political agenda. So I think that's actually a real thing, but I wouldn't extrapolate that into white males like being under attack.
I see it all over, Michael, even other countries too. White people are not allowed to call themselves a nationalist. They can't say that they love their own countries to stand up for it. It's happening all around the world, not just in America. And so if we pretend that it's not happening, it will destroy white people. And once white people are gone, this country, as well as England and wherever, South Africa, all going to hell in a handbasket because people of color don't know how to build. They only destroy. And those people who are coming from asshole countries, they didn't build their own country. What made them think that they can come here and build? It doesn't make sense.
Well, I don't agree with that, to be honest. I mean, I'm not in favor of ethnic nationalism, whether it's Israel, where you have Jews who have entrenched legal privileges, and use that to relegate others non-Jews to second-class status, or where you have the people in the United States who claim to be white nationalists and want their own ethno-state and want to exclude blacks or Hispanics or anybody. I don't feel like that's a.
Is it wrong to be a white?
Politics.
I'm a black nationalist. I believe in my country. I love my country. I want to put it first. Is it wrong to be a white nationalist? If you're a white person and you say, I put my country first, I'm a nationalist, I put my country first, is that wrong?
Well, I mean, you got to distinguish between white nationalism and kind of broader civic nationalism. So a broader civic nationalism could encompass a multiracial coalition. So you personally, as a black man, wouldn't be excluded from that. However, if a white nationalist wants to form a white ethno-state, then you, by definition, would be excluded from that. Or at least that's my understanding, and I'm not in favor of the latter.
But if they did try to exclude me, and there are people who have hatred in their heart, they don't want, like we see it in Louis Farrakhan and other people, all hateful people want their own private hate zone. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the love of our country. And just because you're white or black or Hispanics who love America, you shouldn't be criticized for saying you love America. And the president said that he's a nationalist, and because he's white, they the one added the white part to it to try to make the president look like a bad guy.
Well, I don't think loving America is so much the issue. I mean, I remember Barack Obama would over and over again profess his love of America in various ways.
But he would lie.
The opportunities he received.
He would lie.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
He
how
would
you know
lie,
that.
Michael.
I think Barack Obama does have a genuine appreciation for the opportunities that were afforded to him by virtue of him growing up in America. I mean, the point is, loving America, again, I don't think is the principal matter here. It's whether you translate that into a racially focused, exclusivist conception of how politics could be oriented. And when white nationalists or Jewish nationalists or any other nationalists try to do that, I'm not on board.
Michael, what's your Twitter or whatever you want to give out for the folks?
Yeah, Twitter is mtracey, MTRACEY. I also launched a podcast and a YouTube channel. Support independent journalism if you feel like you want a change in how the media ecosystem functions, because there's been no better sign that it's failed spectacularly than this Trump-Russia fiasco, and we've got to figure out a new way forward.
Michael, you're a smart man. Thanks for coming back, and we'll have you again. I appreciate you, Michael.
All right, thanks, Jesse.
All right, buddy. Michael Tracey, folks. Check him out at Michael Tracey. At M Tracey. All right. Amazing. And don't forget to like, follow, tweet, subscribe, and share the Jesse Lee Peterson radio show, folks. We really appreciate it. We are at war. It is a spiritual battle for the soul of America. And it's going to take all of us to do it.